mosque. Witnesses say the driver shouted about wanting to kill Muslims. Now the investigation. And the religious leader who stepped forward to save the suspect from mob justice.
We managed to surround him and to protect him from any harm.
Plus another attack today, this time in France. The driver targeting Paris police. Now we're hearing what investigators say the attacker was hiding in his car. Also, Russia warning that from now on, American jets in the air over parts of Syria will be treated as potential targets after a U.S. jet shot down a Syrian warplane. Now the Russians are threatening more conflicts as weapons. The most recent happened just hours ago along the Champs-Élysées in Paris. Investigators there say a driver rammed into a police van. Look at this video. It shows the thick yellow smoke pouring from what appears to be the suspect's vehicle. French officials say the attacker was badly burned, then died at the scene. A spokesman for the Interior Ministries tells a Fox News producer on scene there was a gas canister inside the suspect's vehicle, along with an AK-47 rifle. Associated Press reports he also had a handgun. An image here on the man's body on the ground after the attack. Much more on this suspect in just a moment. This comes nearly 2 months after a gunman shot and killed a police officer and injured 2 others along the Champs-Élysées. The Islamic State claimed responsibility for that attack. But nobody has claimed responsibility for today's, and there is no word of a motive. It happened just hours after police across the river in London say a driver in a van plowed into Muslims outside a mosque, injuring at least 9 people. Investigators say 1 man died on scene, but somebody was giving him first aid before the attack, and it's unclear what happened, or what killed him, I should say. It happened overnight as worshipers were leaving prayers during the holy month of Ramadan. Witnesses say the man was speeding when he rammed into the crowd and that worshipers penned down the suspect. They also say the driver shouted, "I'm going to kill Muslims," and was taunting the crowd as officers arrested him, saying, "I'd do it again, I'd do it again." The video appears to show people beating the man on the ground, but an imam at that mosque says he and other people tried to protect the suspect until the cops got there.
We found that a group of people quickly started to collect around him, around the assailant, and some tried to hit him either kicks or punches. By God's grace, we managed to surround him and to protect him from any harm. We stopped all forms of attack and abuse towards him that were coming from every angle.
And our word from police is he was not injured. Police in London say they're investigating today's attack as an act of terror. It is but the latest in a series of recent attacks in London, including one earlier this month involving a suspect who plowed into people along the London Bridge. Our chief intelligence correspondent, Catherine Harris, on Fox Top Story this hour. What more are we learning about that attack in Paris, Catherine?
Well, Shep, the more we learn, the more we understand how the attack could have been so much worse. We now understand that French police were the target of the 31-year-old suspect who was known to the French intelligence services and under surveillance. This is known as the Fiche S. Fiche is French for card or file, and the S stands for state security. This designation only applies to individuals who are considered a serious threat to national security and is considered the highest level of warning. On homegrown terrorism, it applies to suspects who are directly connected to ISIS or al-Qaeda radicals and followers of their websites. ISIS propaganda has encouraged its followers to launch strikes against the West during the holy month of Ramadan, and ISIS has taken suicide attacks into the mainstream for these terror groups, something al-Qaeda never accomplished under Osama bin Laden. Shep.
What are you learning on this attack in London overnight?
Well, let's talk first about the location. Finsbury Park is in North London. This is more than 6 miles from London city centre and the site of previous vehicle attacks on London Bridge earlier this month and Westminster Bridge in March. The British security services have what amounts to a ring of steel around central London, encompassing the prime tourist sites. So the attack in suburban London is concerning for that reason alone, as well as the religious component.
This was quite clearly an attack on Muslims who looked like they were probably Muslims and they were coming from a prayer meeting. We treat this as a terrorist attack, and we in the Met are as shocked as anybody in this local community or across the country at what has happened.
Around 1,000 worshippers attend the mosque in Finsbury for prayers every Friday, and between 1997 and 2003, the Finsbury Park was notorious and associated with a spiritual leader and Egyptian hate preacher Abu Hamza, who was linked to multiple plots, including the December 2001 plot to bring down a jet by the so-called shoe bomber Richard Reed. You'll remember the explosives were packed in his sneaker and failed to go off because the detonator malfunctioned. A 2003 plot to use the poison ricin was also linked to Abu Hamza and the mosque, but British media report the mosque has really done a lot in the last decade to turn around its image, Shep.
Yeah, it really has. Catherine Herridge, thank you. Let's bring in the former CIA military analyst Tara Mahler, now a spokesperson and senior policy advisor for the Counter-Extremism Project. Tara, thank you as always.
Thanks for having me.
Reading a lot about this mosque, it was clearly a problem place associated with problem people and was on the wrong side of where you want to be. That said, in recent years, it has become a very tolerant place from everything you read. A lot of political candidates have gone there. In addition, they helped out a lot of people after this disastrous fire last week. It sounds like the kind of people you want on the side of the good guys, not alienating.
You're exactly right. This mosque is an example, a model case of transformation from a mosque that had extremist ties to a mosque that was essentially transformed. And we see that in the heroism of the individuals who basically took down the attacker. And I think it's interesting to note these horrific attacks, both of them happening within 24 hours in Paris and London, while on the surface seem similar in that they were vehicle attacks. It shows the many shades of terrorism. In one case, you know, we have a man who was targeting Muslims. In the other case, it may have been an individual with ties to ISIS. So you're seeing now the London attack sort of retaliation for these ISIS-inspired attacks, which I'm assuming the Paris one may have been.
What has your level of concern been prior to now that people of, you know, questionable mental faculties would begin a tit-for-tat on this thing?
Well, it's really troublesome and concerning. I mean, we actually see this a lot of times in conflict zones. When you're talking about sectarian warfare, you see cycles of violence escalate in a tit-for-tat manner. That's something very common, and unfortunately it causes escalation in the violence. And so I think it's really important in the aftermath of all of these attacks that there's calls for tolerance, and that you see the individuals coming out and speaking about the unacceptable nature of these attacks, regardless of who the victims are and regardless of who's carrying them out. They're all terrorism, just terrorism taking different forms.
What are we supposed to do? There's a long series of these things, Tara. They said they were coming, and now here they are, and what are you supposed to do?
Look, what you're supposed to do is different across different cases, but there are some general guidelines. We're not going to be able to stop cars or people getting into cars and doing this. So the attention needs to be focused on the individual displaying warning signs. One of these individuals in Paris was on law enforcement's radar. So spotting these signs earlier and preventing the radicalization of these homegrown individuals in the first place, preventing the distribution of the content that may or may not be inspiring them online to carry out these attacks, preventing this mosque was a very tolerant place, but preventing there are extremist leaders online spewing out hatred and calls for violence, preventing those and having individuals like we saw call out and condemn those types of sermons and whatnot. So I think it's very important in the aftermath to focus on that, and also law enforcement and first responders training to respond to these attacks, training to, if they're in motion, quell them before they create or wreak more havoc.
Tara Mahler with us. Tara, thanks again.
Thanks again.
One of President Trump's attorneys says the president is not under investigation, and then said that he is under investigation after the president tweeted, "I'm being investigated for the firing of the FBI director." Now the president's legal team is sort of on the defensive, trying to explain what he really meant. And we'll explain why none of that part matters at all. He is under investigation as part of the Russia election interference probe. Then one of his personal lawyers made the rounds on television over the weekend, saying the president did not confirm that he was under investigation. Now, while trying to make his case that the president didn't confirm what he did confirm, the lawyer confirmed. Sounds a little confusing, but really it's not. We'll play it for you. And you may recognize the lawyer. He's been a frequent guest on this network. Yesterday he was on with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday.
Now he's being investigated by the Department of Justice because the special counsel, under the special counsel regulations, reports still to the Department of Justice, not an independent counsel. So he's being investigated for taking the action that the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General recommended him to take by the agency who recommended the termination.
He's being investigated, like the president tweeted. The lawyer, Jay Sekulow, then said that the president is not under investigation and, well, mixed it up with Chris.
Let me be crystal clear so you completely understand. We have not received nor are we aware of any investigation of the President of the United States.
Sir, you just said
period.
2 times that he's being investigated.
No. The context of the tweet, I just gave you the legal theory, Chris, of how the Constitution works. If, in fact, it was correct that the President was being investigated, he would be investigating for taking action that an agency told him to take. So that is protected under the Constitution as his Article I power. That's all I said. So I appreciate you trying to rephrase it, but I'm just being really direct with you
sir,
here,
I didn't
Chris.
rephrase it. The tape will speak. Jay, the tape will speak for itself. You said he is being investigated.
And he did, twice. Here's the tweet to which the lawyer was referring. President Trump tweeted on Friday, "I am being investigated for firing the FBI director by the man who told me to fire the FBI director, witch hunt." The president was obviously referring to the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who appointed the special counsel, Robert Mueller. But Trump's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, said that the president's tweet was not confirmation that he was under investigation. Instead, Sekulow said it was a response to an anonymous sources leaking to the Washington Post, which was the first to report an investigation over possible obstruction. Remember, none of this matters. The facts are these. There's an investigation into Russian interference with the election. The president fired the man leading that investigation. Jay Sekulow says he represents the president, and if he wants to know whether the president is actually under investigation, he can ask, and nothing will change. The chief White House correspondent, John Roberts, is live at the White House. That was a weekend of things and more things this morning.
Yeah, it actually started on Friday morning, too, Shep. And I was told by a member of the president's legal team early on Friday that when the president tweeted out, "I'm under investigation for firing the FBI director by the man who recommended I fire the FBI director, witch hunt," that he wasn't meaning that he was under investigation or confirming it. He was merely being sarcastic, pointing at the reporting from the Washington Post. We didn't learn any more from the White House this afternoon, the Sean Spicer off-camera gaggle, as it's called in the press briefing room about this, because anytime that the White House is asked about this, they say, well, that's the president's outside counsel that is going to respond to that. So that's why we heard Sekulow talking about it over the weekend, and the White House offering nothing else, other than to say, you know, that what Sekulow said already, and that is that they believe the president's not under investigation. They haven't been informed of any investigation, and even if he were under investigation, he didn't do anything wrong because he did something that the guy who was in charge of Robert Mueller's investigation recommended he do before he fired James Comey. So we're kind of going around in a little bit of a circle here, Shep, but the only person that really knows what's going on would be Robert Mueller. And then he would probably inform his boss, Rod Rosenstein, of what was going on. Now, one thing you could take from that tweet is that perhaps if the president is under investigation, that maybe he's not too happy with his deputy attorney general. So I asked the question of Sean Spicer earlier today, does the president still have confidence in the deputy attorney general, Rod Rosenstein, to which I was told the president has confidence in every member of his administration, to which I responded, including Rod Rosenstein, and Sean Spicer said, yes, every member of his administration. But that's all subject to change, Shep.
And there's no video of that. Could you explain to our viewers why there's no video of that?
Well, this is all part of what we heard a couple of months ago about how the president was upset about the communications team and that there was too much being said from the podium and then not enough being focused on at the proper times, according to the president. So we're seeing that this press secretary, Sean Spicer, is dialing back on the number of on-camera briefings that they're having. He's also not going to do as many as he did before. We'll see Sarah Huckabee Sanders in that lead position more often than we did in the past. But I remember, Shep, having a conversation with Spicer in the first few days after the president took office, in which he indicated that there was no reason to have a briefing every day. So it's not like this is something new. They've been planning this for a long, long time.
That's clear. Hey, you confirmed the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is now considering a new legal team of his own?
Yeah, and the reason why is his current attorney is Jamie Gorelick, who, by the way, was the deputy attorney general. She had Rod Rosenstein's position during the Clinton administration for a few years. She is a partner at WilmerHale. which is where Robert Mueller was a partner before he became the special counsel. So Jamie Gorelick in a statement to Fox News saying, quote, after the appointment of our former partner Robert Mueller as special counsel, we advised Mr. Kushner to obtain the independent advice of a lawyer with appropriate experience as to whether he should continue with us as his counsel. It's not to say that he's not going to continue with Jamie Gorelick, but he is going to make a measured determination as to whether or not he should. Jared Kushner, by the way, is off to the Middle East on Wednesday. He's going to be going to Jerusalem to talk with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Then he'll go to Ramallah to talk with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. They think that there is an opportunity here, Shep, to push the peace process forward, so he'll be working on that. Jason Greenblatt, by the way, who is the president's chief international negotiator, is already on his way to Israel. Shep?
All right. One other matter. The president mentioned last week that we may learn sometime in the near future about whether there are recordings inside the White House. Any update on that?
Yeah, he said last week that maybe he'll get something to us soon. We were told by Sean Spicer a short time ago that we could learn what he has to say by the end of the week. But the president promised us we'd be disappointed. We're waiting to see you, Jeff. Welcome back.
Can't wait for this. Oh, well, thank you very much. John Roberts, still on the North Lawn at the White House. Thanks. Whether under investigation or not, our next guest says the president's tweet was a bit bizarre. He'll explain, plus why he says investigators may not have to prove collusion at all to do real damage to the Trump White House. That's coming up. Sent out there to do this. He was on all the shows. I mean, he was over on CNN this morning, and, you know, they had a field day with him, and then he had this Chris Wallace thing yesterday that, I mean, it was all just a mess. Why would the White House want that to be the narrative?
I don't know. It's a little baffling, Shep, but it seems like it's the president's directive himself to simply have people out there, particularly on cable TV, which we know the president consumes a lot of, putting up a good fight for him and insisting that their talking points are that he's not under investigation, and they're going to slam those home as far as they can, even though how the White House would know precisely what the contours of Bob Mueller's relatively new investigation is or are in this context is pretty hard to understand.
Of course, it doesn't really matter from an investigative standpoint, be it criminal or congressional. It would only matter in politics, and then only to the base, which you already have, right?
Right. I mean, and that goes to the collusion issue you were mentioning earlier. You know, it might possibly be the case that in the end there is no evidence of collusion. Even some Democrats have said they don't think any hard evidence of that has emerged. But there are many other crimes, improprieties, and mistakes one can commit on the road to that conclusion that could be very, very troublesome. There's the old phrase, it's often the cover-up, not the crime. And so I don't see how it excuses anything that might have gone on to say that there was nothing really underlying all of this at the beginning.
But there were a lot of things that the White House wanted to be discussed this week. And instead, it's all here. I've been watching and reading. This is what it's all about, something that doesn't matter from an investigative standpoint at all, and whatever it is this week is supposed to be, it's not that.
That's exactly right, and it seems like this has happened week after week from this White House, especially when they decide to engage on these issues. I've seen a number of people observe that out on those Sunday shows over the weekend. They basically had no one laying out the administration's positive agenda, primarily, you would think, because those folks realized they'd be hit with a barrage of questions about the Russia investigation and about the president's tweets, and that, say, the Secretary of Commerce was not necessarily the best person to respond to those. But there's really no question that the narrative is being sort of formed in a channel here that is not to the White House's benefit.
Today, we had the President of Panama in here, and he talked about how well the Panama Canal is working out. It's, you know, it's 100 years old. And then we find out Jared Kushner is going to go over there and work on Middle East peace. I guess, are those their agenda items that they want us talking about? Are you clear on that?
I mean, it's supposed to be even broader than that. They have these technology executives in trying to sort of jumpstart a process there. They got a little bit derailed, I think, when some folks jumped off of their advisory panel. And then we've got even over at the Justice Department people talking about this being Crime Week, which maybe is not something the White House wants to be talking about when there's talk of criminal investigations underway at the Justice Department. So it's a bit of a muddle which of those things the White House would like us to be discussing. We just know whatever it is, it doesn't seem to be happening at the moment.
Well, Josh Gerstein from Politico. Good to see you. Thank you.
See you.
The Russian government is making specific threats now against the United States military after American commanders shot down a Syrian warplane in the skies over that war zone. So what now? Now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs answers questions. Could the Russian military shoot down U.S. forces? We're live at the Pentagon with a very complicated situation that just ramped up a notch. Plus, starting tonight, the Democrats say they'll start to block all Senate work as a protest over how the Republicans are handling their health care bill talks. You know, have you seen the health care bill? Have you read what's in it? Nobody has. 12 men. Coming up, Mike Emanuel explains how the Democrats will try to stop absolutely everything from getting done. Welcome to Washington. The news continues. Russian defense officials have just sort of ratcheted up the rhetoric and the tension with the United States. Here's what those defense officials now say. American jets over parts of Syria are now aerial targets. They stop short of threatening to actually shoot them down. Specifically, they say that they'll consider planes flying west of the Euphrates River to be targets. The reason? The United States, or a U.S. jet, shot down a Syrian plane for the first time ever. It was also the first time a U.S. jet shot down another country's aircraft anywhere since 1999. That was a Serbian plane over Kosovo. U.S. officials say the Syrian jet had dropped bombs near U.S.-backed forces, but the Russians called the shoot-down an act of aggression. One Russian defense official said because his country's new warning, neither the United States nor anybody else will take any action to threaten Russian aircraft. Well, today, a Pentagon spokesman fired back, telling Fox News, "We do not seek conflict with any party in Syria other than ISIS. But we will not hesitate to defend ourselves or our partners if threatened." So here we go. It's the next level, rhetorically at least, and Jennifer Griffin's at the Pentagon with some explaining. Hello, Jen.
Hi, Shepard. Well, it's a big deal because at times it looks like the U.S. is inching its way toward a proxy war with Russia and now Iran in Syria. The Russian reaction was swift, but it's important to remember that they have threatened to do so before to stop this hotline. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Joe Dunford, said today the hotline was still operational as of this morning.
I'm confident that we are still communicating between our Operations Center and the Russian Federation Operations Center, and I'm also confident that our forces have the capability to take care of themselves.
General Dunford said U.S. defense officials will work diplomatically and militarily to de-escalate the situation. Remember, U.S. warplanes rarely fly west of the Euphrates. Shep.
Iran fired some missiles into Syria too, right?
That's right. Also happening this weekend, not to be outdone, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard fired off 6 ballistic missiles that flew across Iraq and targeted ISIS forces south of Raqqa, not far from where U.S.-backed forces are moving in on the terrorist bases and capital in Syria. The U.S. was given no warning from the Iranians, who said this weekend's launch was retaliation for 2 recent attacks claimed by ISIS in Tehran, including one attack on Parliament.
Tehran is not London or Paris. It was a small action we carried out. If they make a mistake, deadlier strikes will be blown to them.
Earlier this month, the U.S. shot down an Iranian drone in southern Syria. This is the 4th time, Shep, in a month the U.S. military has fired on pro-regime forces backed by Russia and/or Iran.
Jennifer, thanks. Let's turn to Michael O'Hanlon now, Senior Fellow in Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. That's a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy organization. Hey, good to see you.
Good to be on, Shep.
The rhetoric here, I'm not sure what's happened, practically speaking, but the rhetoric is at a new level.
Yeah, I think that's right, although, as you know, there have been previous experiences and events that have similarly engaged some bad back and forth between Moscow and Washington. For example, the cruise missile strike of early April led to the same kind of, at least temporary, warnings about not to come near, not to do this again, not to violate parts of western Syrian airspace. Russia made those kinds of comments before. We sort of inched our way back. As Jennifer pointed out, we don't necessarily fly in the West very much anyway, even now. But we were especially careful, as I understand things, after that cruise missile strike. So we've had this kind of thing before. You know that Turkey and Russia had this, a year and a half ago when the Turkish military shot down a Russian aircraft over their airspace. So when people are jostling for position in a place like this, to some extent these are dangers that recur and probably will continue to do so.
Now, is our big, if competition is the right word, is the big competition in that region Russia, or is it others?
Well, it's a great question, and you're right to even put some asterisks or some quotation marks around the word competition. We don't really know what we want in Syria except to defeat ISIS. And by the way, the Pentagon spokesman that you referenced, he said our only enemy is ISIS. That's not quite right, because Al-Qaeda has an affiliate in Syria, too. Presumably, they're our enemy there. And, you know, just defeating ISIS is not going to end the civil war. It's not going to take away future sanctuaries for a group like ISIS or Al-Qaeda. So we still need a bigger strategy that has to be consistent with most of what Russia wants to end the civil war in Syria. Otherwise, a tactical defeat of ISIS may not really amount to much in the longer term. So we got a lot of thinking left to do here.
Explain for our viewers why any solution to the, 8-year-long civil war in Syria has to provide what the Russians want.
Well, it's a good question, but I think let's look, for example, to the northwest of the country in this area around Idlib. That's where the Al-Qaeda affiliate is holed up. That's where a number of Russia-friendly groups and also the more moderate opposition that we like are all sort of in one space. What's going to happen next? Is Assad going to attack them? Is he going to try to defeat them? Is Al-Qaeda going to try to co-opt the moderate insurgents that we work with? There is absolutely no way to tell what's going to happen up there. And I think Russia is not going to be, you know, if they're upset about what we're doing in the eastern part of the country, imagine as we get very close to their bases in the west. So that's the kind of place where I think we need some kind of a concept of how we're going to cooperate, especially because Syria, frankly, is just not worth superpower war. So we don't want to get to the point where we're actually shooting at Russian airplanes. They don't want to shoot at us. So we need some way to at least, you know, reconcile our most important objectives. That's why I say, since there's no driving Russia out of this thing militarily and it's not worth the price to do so, we're going to have to find some way at least to, you know, split our differences down the middle.
Michael O'Hanlon, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Shepard.
Democratic lawmakers are preparing to grind nearly all business in the United States Senate to a halt, making it a real challenge to get even routine things done. That's the word from a senior Democratic aide who tells Fox News that Democrats are trying to stop the GOP from scrapping the Affordable Health Care Act and forcing them to be more transparent in this process. Even though they control the House, the Senate, and GOP lawmakers have struggled to pass health care reform, tax reform, or really anything else. The clock is frankly running out before Congress goes on vacation for a month, and some Republicans are calling for their leaders to cancel the vacation. Mike Emanuel with the news on Capitol Hill. Mike, the Senate Majority Leader has said that he wanted to vote on health care before they go away on July the 4th.
Shep, that's absolutely true. So as you mentioned, Senate Democrats are beginning to mobilize. That senior Democratic aide telling us tonight Senate Democrats will begin objecting to almost all unanimous consent requests, slowing down just about everything, including the very trivial stuff. After that, they're also going to take other tactics to try and grind the Senate to a halt. Bottom line, they're trying to convince Republicans, force Republicans to defend health care on the Senate floor. And bottom line, Republicans are saying they're still going to try to get it done.
I'm confident and committed to getting this to the floor, and I'm working hard to make sure we get the votes to pass it. You need at least 50 with the vice president breaking the tie. But if you take a step back and say, why are we doing this? It's because premiums have exploded, doubled in the last 4 years. Choices have gotten less, but we're focused on protecting people with pre-existing conditions.
And there are plenty of changes that we need to make to the Affordable Care Act, like bringing the prices of prescription drugs down. But doing this behind closed doors is actually not what we did with the Affordable Care Act.
Pressure's building as Senate Republicans try to keep that deadline of a 4th of July holiday for a vote. Shep.
And then there's Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, set to have a sort of tax reform speech tomorrow, right?
That's right, a tax reform speech. It's being billed as a major policy address. House Speaker Paul Ryan's wanted to do tax reform for many years, and so he's going to lay out his vision tomorrow before the National Association of Manufacturers. This is some of his rank-and-file members are tired of waiting around for the Senate.
I have the frustration, too. It's really hard in the House, especially, to take vote after vote after vote and have the Senate do nothing and then have the entirety of Congress be, blamed for it.
The House and Senate are not totally in sync on tax reform, but Ryan's getting out there to sell it. Shep.
All right. Mike Emanuel on Capitol Hill. Mike, thank you. There's a lot more than money on the line in the most expensive House race ever. Voters are about to decide in a contest that could be a really big test for the president and a possible sign of what to expect come midterm elections. Also, if you've been registered to vote in the last decade, there's a good chance your personal information is now out in the public. That's according to a cybersecurity team. Election in Georgia tomorrow, and the analysts say it could be a very big test of President Trump's support ahead of the 2018 midterms. The Democrat in this case is Jon Ossoff, and the Republican Karen Handel. They're facing off in Georgia's 6th congressional district. Now, Republicans have held that seat for decades. Remember, Newt Gingrich had it at one point. But right now, all indications are that this race is very tight. It's also become the most expensive House race of any House race in the history of the United States. Get this, campaigns and outside groups have now spent more than $50 million in just the past 6 months. President Trump has weighed in on Twitter today. He said the Dems want to stop tax cuts, good health care, and border security. Their Obamacare is dead with 100% increases in premiums. Vote now for Karen H. So why is this race, this particular race, considered by both Democrats and Republicans to be a real test? Well, it's a more affluent and educated area in Georgia, the kind of place Democrats think they might be able to make some inroads, and the kind of place Republicans are vowing to stop any Democratic gains. It'll be a big day, and Jonathan Seri will cover it. He's Atlanta-based for us and live there for us today. Jonathan?
Hi, Shep. At this point, the race is a coin toss. Recent polls are showing the two candidates neck and neck, which is remarkable when you consider that Democrats are actually competing in a district that historically favors establishment Republicans. Listen.
This is exactly the type of district they hope they can win if they can retake the House in 2018. There's 24 seats they need to win. A lot of them are going to be these fast-changing suburban districts that Republicans have long held.
More than 140,000 voters have already cast early ballots in this race. That's more than twice the amount of early voters in the April primary. Quite remarkable for a special election. Both candidates trying to generate enthusiasm, calling on some big names with solid Georgia ties. Tom Price, who held the District 6 seat before he was named President Trump's Health and Human Services Secretary, has been campaigning for Handel, while Congressman and civil rights icon John Lewis has been stumping for Ossoff. Ossoff is trying to appeal to moderate Republicans and independents, saying that he'll go to Washington and work with both parties to cut government waste. Handel, meanwhile, is appealing to her Republican base and trying to tie her opponent to Nancy Pelosi and other California liberals. Shep.
Jonathan Seri with the preview today and covering it tomorrow. Coverage throughout the day on Fox News. Some 198 million people exposed in what appears to be the largest ever leak of American voting records. See, if you've been registered to vote in the last decade or so if you moved or whatever, it probably affected you. That's according to the cybersecurity team UpGuard. It reports that a Republican data and analytics company was storing information on what turned out to be an unsecured computer server. The information includes people's birthdays, home addresses, phone numbers, and whether they're Republicans or Democrats, or registered as such. The company that owns the data is called Deep Root Analytics. In a statement to the tech website ZDNet, an executive wrote, his company is taking responsibility, and noted since this event has come to our attention, we have updated our access settings and put protocols in place to prevent further access. In other words, the server's now on lockdown. But how many people have already downloaded our details? Right now, analysts say there's really no way to be sure, and really, nothing you can do about it. So have